Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Anne?
All right, well, thank you, Suki. Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Ann Gill, President and CEO of the Tempe Chamber of Commerce. And as we all move through these uncharted and uncertain times, at the Tempe Chamber, we continually strive to provide you with accurate information and resources to support our Tempe business community. And today we'll be joined by Jennings Imel from the U.S. Chamber to discuss the road to recovery and what it means for your business. So following his presentation, we'll have time set aside for a moderated Q&A. So to ask questions during the broadcast, please type them directly into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. And while your video and microphone will not be enabled as a guest, you'll definitely need to use that Q&A function exclusively. And one thing you should know, we typically receive lots of questions and we're always grateful and happy to help. The questions are being monitored by a member of our team to identify the most commonly asked questions and themes. So if we don't get to answer your specific question, we hope that we'll be able to provide you with some direct advice that will help you in running your business and get through these difficult times. So as I mentioned, our guest speaker today is Jennings Imel, the Executive Director of the Western Region in the Congressional and Public Affairs Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. His office is responsible for legislative and political grassroots activities in Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and Utah, and in support of the U.S. Chamber's national public policy goals. So today he'll provide an update on resources available to help your business and employees navigate the return to work safely, successfully, and sustainably. And so now I'll turn the program over to my friend and colleague, Jennings Imel.
Great, thanks Ann, thanks for having me, appreciate it. And thanks for everything really that the Tempe Chamber does in support of the local business community there. You know, chambers of commerce throughout the country have really been called upon to be that go-to resource in very difficult times, obviously, and I think that chambers, especially the Tempe Chamber, are really showing your value more so now than ever. And that's a big part of the reason too why we think that C6s and chambers of commerce should be included for federal assistance, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But thanks for all that you do and for your partnership. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Over a couple of things, kind of a review of some of the things that are in the CARES Act. And then talk about kind of the return to work, path forward, and kind of some of the issues that we're going to be focusing on at the U.S. Chamber, and we're going to be calling on Congress to address over the next couple of weeks. So first off, you know, just looking back at the CARES Act, of course, which was this huge package passed at the end of March. Hard to believe it's already been almost 2 months since this was passed by Congress. Really important provisions, obviously, for small business. I'm sure that a number of the folks that are on the call have already attempted to get access to some of these provisions and apply for things like the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program, and the SBA's EIDL program, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. There were changes, of course, additions made in the Phase 3.5 bill, as we call it, that was passed a couple of weeks ago on a unanimous or near unanimous basis in both the House and the Senate. So for the PPP program, many of you will remember that first tranche of money was about $350 billion. And that after the program went live on April 3rd, it took about a week and a half for that entire amount to be exhausted. We saw 1.7 million applications go through. Average loan size is about $200,000 or so. And I think Congress was really kind of caught off guard by how fast that program ran out of money. So to address that issue, they took up the Phase 3.5 bill, which added more money for the PPP program as well as for the EIDL program. There's also additional funds for healthcare purposes and for COVID-19 testing, hospitals, things like that. But what they did was they added $310 billion for the PPP program so that the applications that were already in the queue could be processed. And I think that that's been successful thus far. And of course, I don't think I have to go over the criteria or eligibility requirements for that program, as many of you are already aware, but they're up on the screen in case you're interested. The EIDL program, same thing. That program ran out of money very quickly. The lending capacity in comparison to the PPP was very limited. And so Congress, to address that, they added $50 billion to the program and another $10 billion for the cash advance grant of up to $10,000 that businesses could take advantage of. So that was added. However, just based off of the backlog of applications that were already in the queue at the SBA, that money has pretty much all been accounted for. So even after this additional money was appropriated, the SBA, I think, only was accepting new applications for a very limited amount of time. I think that they only had the portal up for a couple of days or so before they closed it again. So that's unfortunate, but there is still money in the PPP program, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. There's also the employer retention tax credit, something that I know a number of businesses have taken advantage of, but if you haven't, or if you haven't gotten the PPP, or if that doesn't work for you, or the EIDL program, then that's certainly something to take a look at, where you can get essentially up to $5,000 per employee. And that's if you're an employer that was either fully or partially shut down due to COVID-19, or you've seen a 50% or more drop in your revenue compared to the quarter from the previous year, then you would be eligible for this employee retention tax credit. Different rules apply for different size businesses. By the way, this is something that businesses of all sizes could take advantage of. But if you're less than 100 employees, then you could use this tax credit for all of your employees. If you have more than 100 employees, then you'd only be able to apply that $5,000 for the employees that are essentially that you're paying to stay at home and currently aren't in the workplace and conducting work. So there are different rules there. And it's also important to note that you cannot use the employee retention tax credit and the PPP simultaneously. You have to do one or the other. But that's a kind of an important tool, I think, for a lot of businesses if the PPP doesn't work for them. Same thing for the payroll tax deferment. Once again, this is only acceptable if you haven't accepted a PPP loan. This is where you can essentially, as an employer, defer your portion of payroll taxes at 6.2% payroll tax. You could defer that and then have half of that, the amount be due at the end of 2021, and then the other half due at the end of 2022. So that's a way to kind of reestablish liquidity and get money back into the business as soon as possible. And also, if you go to Treasury's website, treasury.gov/cares, you'll be able to find out more information on how to take advantage of both of those programs. And there's more information too on how to get your money essentially right away. So for something like the employee retention tax credit, it goes over the rules and how you'd be able to make sure that you get your money back on your next quarterly filing. So that's really helpful and something to keep in mind. I think at that point, Suki, it might be good to release the poll. I know that Tempe Chamber had been working on a poll to ask business members if they'd applied for the PPP, if they'd applied for the EIDL loan program. I think that'd be an important question to pass out, and please feel free to answer that. We're trying to get kind of a good understanding of how many businesses have applied and successfully applied. So how many have received money. So that's great. Let's see, moving forward. Interesting to note kind of the statistics from this second round of PPP. That was that phase 3.5 bill that I mentioned that passed a couple of weeks ago, $310 billion. Really interesting to see that only $188 billion has been approved. So this is as of Sunday, May 10th, which means that there's a lot of capacity left in this program. And so if folks have not yet applied for a PPP loan, I would strongly encourage them to do so if it makes sense for their business. This program has not run out of money like the first tranche of money did, or like the first tranche of PPP did. So that's kind of interesting to note. There have been 2.5 million loans approved by the SBA. The average loan size is significantly smaller in the second round. We're talking about $73,000 per loan as opposed to $200,000. We're also seeing more lenders participate. We're at about 5,400 lenders. And what's also great to see is that so many financial institutions that are kind of smaller financial institutions with less than 50 billion or even less than $10 billion in assets, they're really kind of making up, even almost close to a majority of the total amount of loans that have been approved. They constitute. So that's been great to see, and that's really allowed, I think, a lot of the smaller businesses, especially folks that didn't have those traditional lending relationships, it's been able to allow them to get access to that PPP money. But just so that everybody's aware, there is still a pretty significant amount of capacity left in the PPP program. The EIDL program, as I mentioned, that's really not the case there. That money, for the most part, the additional $50 billion is already accounted for. The SBA is currently working through the backlog that they had the first time around. Also, interesting to note that the maximum loan amount, even though it says that you can receive up to $2 million in working capital, that's expected to be capped at around $150,000 per loan applicant, just because the money isn't there and there are so many applications in the queue. And like I said, too, the application portal is currently closed. Trying to get my next slide. There we go. The other program that's out there, well, that's not out there yet, but was first kind of set up in the CARES Act, or we saw statutory language for it in the CARES Act, and now the Federal Reserve is working on establishing what we call the Main Street Lending Program. And this is a program that's specifically for businesses with less than 15,000 employees. So it's really envisioned for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, not these super large, businesses, but more of kind of that mid-sized businesses. And then also, this is even something that smaller folks, smaller businesses that didn't take advantage or didn't get a PPP loan, or even if you did get a PPP loan and you still require additional capital, this is something that you could also take advantage of as well. It's for businesses, like I said, less than 15,000 employees or less than $5 billion in revenue. These loans are once again going to be administered through the banks. The program is not yet operational. We have seen, however, the loan terms from the Federal Reserve. Those came out on April 30th, but they're still working to set up the credit facilities and the vehicles that would make this happen. Not exactly sure when that's going to be, but would anticipate some point within the next couple of weeks that they'll be able to get that online. There are going to be restrictions for folks to take advantage of the Main Street Lending Program, restrictions on stock buybacks and dividends, executive compensation, things like that are also included. There are going to be 3 different credit facilities that will be established as part of this Main Street Lending Program. You'll have a new facility, a priority facility, and an expanded loan facility. In my next slide, we'll kind of go over some of the loan terms for all 3. Important to note that the minimum loan amount is $500,000 or $10 million for the expanded loan facility, and the maximum loan amount is $25 million or $100 million for the expanded loan facility. Now, the eligibility requirements are that the business needed to be established before March 13th of this year. Like I said, no more than 15,000 employees or $5 billion in revenue in 2019. The business would have had to have been created or organized in the United States with significant operations in the United States and a majority of employees in the United States. And it's also important to note that businesses that, even if you receive the PPP loan, you could also apply for a Main Street Lending for that program and receive assistance there as well. And the program will be in effect until September 30th of 2020. And the loan terms are on the side of the screen there, where you can see, once again, the minimum loan size, the maximum loan size, the risk retention for the lender. So the Federal Reserve will be purchasing between 85 and 95% of the loan. So you'll have a kind of minimal risk for the lenders that are participating. All payments will be deferred for the first year. And then you have kind of years 2 through 4, depending on which Main Street loan the business ultimately takes advantage of. Of course, you'll have different terms for that. The interest rate is going to be at essentially the benchmark interest rate, which is about 0.5% or so. That's going to be, however, determined by the lender, plus 3%. And then there's going to be a lender transaction fee, borrower origination fee. We're still waiting, like I said, for more information from the Federal Reserve on some of these things, but these general terms we have seen because they were released a couple of weeks ago. We also have on our website at uschamber.com/coronavirus, you can get more information and get access to our program guide on this, where you can find the chart that's there on the side of the screen, as well as additional information on eligibility requirements and what else you have to kind of be on the lookout for as you consider applying for this program. Now, that's kind of an overview of some of the programs that are out there, PPP, EIDL, Main Street. Like I said, hopefully we'll get that set up within a few weeks or so. Now, the other issue that we're going to be talking about and really kind of focusing the most on, I think, is going to be liability protection. And that's something that we're stressing as an absolute must-have in a phase 4 package. And there's been a lot of talk about phase 4, about what Congress is going to do next, how they're going to follow up with the CARES Act. Liability has got to be number 1 on the list. We've done polling of small businesses with MetLife throughout the country, and we have found that liability issues for the employees, for customers, that's right up there. That's one of the top issues that we consistently hear about, and the fact that businesses just don't know going forward how they're going to be able to open up if they don't have the confidence that's required to know that they're not going to be subject to frivolous lawsuits in case they do have a customer that, God forbid, comes down with COVID-19, or they have an employee that gets COVID-19. So long as businesses are doing everything that they're supposed to do and acting responsibly, they should not be on the hook for those things. So what we've done is we've kind of identified 4 different buckets for liability protection, and we have a couple of principles that we apply to this as well. First off, any kind of liability protection, protections that are included in phase 4, the next coronavirus bill, they have to be timely, temporary, and targeted. So we're not talking about blanket immunity for businesses, where they can't be sued no matter what. That's absolutely not what we want to see, but we want to see legal safe harbors that are temporary too, so nothing permanent. This will only last so long as the national emergency tied to COVID-19 lasts. So we want to see something that's absolutely temporary and provides the legal safe harbors so long as businesses are doing their best to comply with CDC guidance, with OSHA guidance, and with local health guidance, and they're not, negligent in the workplace and reckless and things like that. So long as they're acting responsibly and adhering to that guidance, they should have a legal safe harbor and should not be subject to frivolous litigation. Federal preemption is another big principle of ours. We're seeing states move on this independently. Some states are going in the right direction, which is good. I know that the state of Arizona, for example, has some liability protections, especially for healthcare workers, which is good. State of Utah, for example, they've passed pretty broad protections through the legislature and signed by the governor. That's great. But what we really want to see is the federal government act on this so we can have a uniform set of rules that apply to all 50 states. And so we don't have a patchwork of various kind of guidance and regulation that's out there. Speaking of guidance and regulation, that's another big principle of ours. And this is especially important to look at on a state-by-state basis, where we're seeing states come out with guidance that is kind of converting into regulation. So we don't want to see that. We don't think that that's going to be helpful for business. We think that kind of sticking to guidance is probably the best road forward, especially at the state level at this point. As far as the buckets of liability are concerned, like I mentioned, we've identified 4 different issues that need to be addressed. The first one is exposure liability. So this is for those businesses that open up, that if they have a customer come in that claims that they got COVID-19, or if they have an employee that claims that they got COVID-19 in the workplace, as long as that business was doing everything possible to adhere to CDC and OSHA guidance and local guidance, that means they had PPE properly installed. They were kind of sticking to the social distancing measures of 6 feet apart. They had hand sanitizer available, they had wipes available, they were regularly cleaning their workplace, they were doing things like that. As long as they were doing their best and acting in that kind of a responsible manner, adhering to the guidance, they should receive a legal safe harbor. Product liability absolutely is going to be important for manufacturers of PPE, and especially for Good Samaritan businesses, right? So distilleries and breweries, we've heard a lot about them kind of shifting some of their manufacturing to hand sanitizers and things like that. They're doing their best to respond to really a national and global crisis and be able to get this essential equipment out there for folks, and they shouldn't be subject to potentially frivolous litigation. And the same thing goes for end users of PPE and things like that. So long as they're doing their best to stick to OSHA and CDC guidance on how to install PPE and how to train their employees on the use of that PPE, they also should not be subject to frivolous litigation on that issue. healthcare providers, that goes without saying. Absolutely, folks that are working on COVID-19, they need to have the liability protections that will make it necessary, will make them able to continue to provide their essential service to assist folks that are dealing with this terrible disease and other issues as well. And then securities litigation is finally the last bucket, where we've seen a lot of stock prices and things like that for a number of publicly traded companies drop, and we're seeing an increasing amount of securities litigation. And so I think it's important to note that something like that we should see at least a delay in some of that litigation moving forward as businesses struggle to reopen and to kind of get back on their feet. So those are the 4 buckets. Really, the first 3 buckets align pretty neatly with what the Senate has identified. This has been a big issue for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in the Senate, and Senate Republicans are really pushing strongly to get liability protections for businesses in order to give them kind of the safety and security and confidence that they're going to need in order to reopen. Some helpful links that I think will be good for folks that are on this call: CDC guidance. You could find through the CDC's website if you go to cdc.gov/coronavirus, or you could even go to our website, once again, uschamber.com/coronavirus, and you could find the link there. OSHA guidance is also on our website, and you can go directly to osha.gov and get more information from OSHA. So I think that that's really helpful for businesses, and they should certainly check that out. And then lastly, the phase 4 litigation, obviously being the red line for Senate Republicans and being a major issue for the U.S. Chamber. That's going to be a big focal point, I think, of the discussion moving forward over the next couple of weeks. But a lot of different topics are sure to be included in the phase 4 conversation. I'm sure a number of you already saw today that the House released kind of their plan, which is called the HEROES Act. This is kind of a CARES Act Part 2. It's roughly a $3 trillion plan. They have nearly $1 trillion for state and local governments. You have money for mortgage relief and renter assistance. There's also a second round of checks for individuals and families, SNAP benefit increases. There's all kinds of things in here. Really kind of no chance of moving anywhere in the Republican-controlled Senate, but it lays down the marker for House Democrats. These are the issues that they're prioritizing. The one red line that they've really identified is local and state funding. In the first CARES Act, there was $150 billion for local governments and for municipalities with more than 500,000 residents. That was, however, restricted to COVID-19 costs. So with revenues obviously cratering across the board for state governments and local governments, Democrats are prioritizing that as a major issue. And so that's kind of been their red line. On the Senate side, they're very much looking at taking a wait and see approach. Senate Majority Leader McConnell has made that very clear, as have a number of his colleagues, that, you know, the CARES Act was $2.2 trillion. Then you had another bill on top of that, which was somewhere like $600 billion, I believe. So we're close to $3 trillion that Congress has appropriated in just two months. And so there are growing concerns on the Republican side that this level of debt and the deficit that we're going to see in the fiscal year and for the entire year in 2020 is unsustainable. And so I think that that's been a growing concern for Republicans on the Senate side. And so they're going to want to kind of see what works and what doesn't work in the CARES Act, and then really kind of address those issues as they come up. So they're going to be much more looking at kind of oversight of the CARES Act, of implementation of the bill, what gaps were there, what needs to be filled. There's not really much of an appetite for new spending on the Senate side. So that's why, you know, I think we're going to see kind of a return of partisanship. Even though, you know, the last couple of bills that passed on coronavirus were done so in a very bipartisan fashion, I think that those days are largely over. Even though anything else that happens is going to have to be bipartisan, I think we're going to see some pretty bitter partisan fighting over the next couple of weeks. And the red line issue really for Republicans moving forward is going to be liability protections. They are absolutely insistent that be included in a phase 4 package. And like I said, we agree absolutely with that approach. And we'll see what happens, but the timing for any kind of phase 4 bill looks like it's probably going to be after Memorial Day. So sometime early June, I would imagine, just kind of based on the way things are currently looking. And other issues are bound to be included here. So the PPP program, like I said, not running out of money yet. It could, I guess, at some point, and that could potentially be a catalyst for Congress to act, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen in the near term. However, there are changes to PPP that have been floated. There are folks that don't like the 75-25 split for payroll and rent and interest and utilities and things like that. There have been some frustrations there. There have been some talk about, extending the terms of loan forgiveness, so from 8 weeks to something longer. You can imagine there are a lot of different kind of reform proposals that have been put out there for the PPP program and others. So we'll see what comes about from that. One major issue that we're really focusing on as it relates to PPP is making sure that nonprofits are included. So as the CARES Act was originally written, only 501c3 and 501c19 veteran organizations were eligible for PPP assistance and to participate in that program. We think that it should be open to 501c6s, which are chambers of commerce, as well as C4s, civic organizations, and other 501c tax exempt organizations, especially because so many are kind of on the front lines themselves doing great work during difficult times. And we believe that they should be included for assistance as well. And there has been a bipartisan bill that was introduced last week, HR 6697 by Republican Fitzpatrick and Democrat Pappas, which I think has probably some legs. I think that they're in the process of gathering co-sponsors at the moment, and I know that the Arizona delegation, including Congressman Stanton, and both senators have been very supportive of including 501c6s for PPP money. So I think that's kind of a good thing to see, some good news, a good development. And hopefully we'll be able to gather more co-sponsors onto that bill and include it into the final coronavirus package. That's pretty much it. Lastly, though, I should also mention, because Congressman Stanton, he's been a great friend of ours on a number of issues. We've been able to really work with him very well as a moderate Democrat, somebody that can kind of build a bridge with Republicans and get things done. I think when we're talking about liability protections, I think it'll be important to impress upon him the importance of including liability protections in phase 4. That's been one of our biggest issues so far, is that this has really just kind of been a partisan issue. Even though I think Republicans and Democrats agree that something needs to be done, we're really only seeing Republicans take up the liability protection mantle. And so we'd like to see more Democrats do that as well. So I think any kind of additional push that we can make with a moderate member like Congressman Greg Stanton, I think that would be really, really helpful. So that's pretty much it. I know it's a lot of information, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
Hi, Jennings. Thank you for that. First, I wanted to share the information for the poll that we took. Of all the respondents, we had 100% saying that they had applied for PPP, and all of those respondents have received their funds. So that's great. That's good news.
That's fantastic.
We had one question. If a business was accepted and received financial assistance during the first phase of PPP, can they apply for it again in round 2 of PPP?
No. So this is just for folks that didn't get in the program the first time around. You can only apply once for the PPP loan.
Okay. And currently, that was the only question we had in the Q&A. Okay. So folks are welcome to follow up with any questions. You can send them to my email address, which should have been on your invitation for this webinar, and we'll be happy to follow up.
Great. Thanks, Suki. Thanks, Ann. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jennings. Appreciate you being here today and coming on and updating us on some of the programs that are coming and some of the information and legislation that you're working on. We will send out a follow-up with the links that Jennings mentioned in his presentation in regards to CDC guidelines and OSHA guidelines. As businesses look to reopen, this is really important to follow to help protect with any potential liability issues that are coming up. On the Arizona level, from the state, we are also working, there is a bill in the Senate right now in regards to employer liability protections, especially with patrons coming into your business. And so that's something, in addition, we're working on it at the state level as well. But appreciate everyone tuning in today. And Jennings, thank you for the update on what's happening. And again, we're here to help. We have information at tempechamber.org, and our State of the District with Congressman Stanton is coming up on May 22nd, and information about that is on our website. So look forward to having folks attend and be able to ask questions of our congressman as well. So thank you again for your support, and we're here to help. Thanks.